back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Actual English with me, Jennifer Clyde. It is time for lesson 94, and today let's talk about complaints, but not ordinary complaints, complaints given by neighbors. Neighbor complaints. So have you ever had to complain to a neighbor for some reason? Or has any neighbor complained to you about anything? I think these days, especially people living in apartments, in many cases, people get angry at each other because of noise made from upstairs or even downstairs. If you, of course, have children living upstairs, living above you, they do run around, so you will hear those stomping sounds here and there. They may even play with a basketball or some sort of ball, bounce it on the floor, and those sounds could be very, very annoying and frustrating at times. So you may end up going to your neighbor's house, knocking on the door, or even ringing the bell and saying, "Could you please keep it down?" Okay, we'll talk about that today, okay? Let's begin with actual talk.
You know, when I was growing up, we lived in a house in the suburbs with a big yard. So we had lots of space. And, space between us and our neighbors.
Right.
So we could, turn up the music or do whatever, have arguments, the dogs could bark, and nobody really complained. But now living in Seoul, it's a little different. You're living in close quarters with many people, right?
That's right. You hear a lot of news about noise pollution and neighbors fighting over the sound coming from upstairs and stuff like that. The police are even involved.
I heard there were some murders about that recently.
Yeah, that wasn't very good. And people... They're starting to soundproof apartments by putting mats on the floors, but that's not working very well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean...
I'm a little worried.
Why?
Well, because I have two young children running around.
Do you even know who your neighbors are?
Not yet, no.
Maybe you should go and befriend them.
Well, we're moving to a place with many young kids, so I'm a little worried about the neighbors upstairs.
Upstairs?
Not as concerned for some reason about the neighbors downstairs.
That's interesting.
Because I care about my sleep.
Oh, no. Well, to be honest, I'm on pretty good terms with my neighbors. Well, the ones that I do know.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was this one neighbor who used to play the guitar at midnight every single day. And that drove me nuts.
Is it acoustic or electric?
Acoustic guitar, but he or she was not very good at it. So you could hear this twanging at midnight. I'm just trying to get to sleep. And
do you complain to your neighbors
then?
then?
No, that's the thing though. I think a lot of people are like me. They don't complain.
Well, sometimes I think it's appropriate to complain. You can call the police.
Oh no, I think I should just go down and talk to them.
Good idea.
Okay, did you enjoy the actual talk conversation? As always, we had help from Peter and Joanne, so thanks to them. Let's take a look at what they mentioned in today's conversation. We're, of course, talking about neighbor complaints, and Peter said, when I was growing up, meaning when I was young, we lived in a house in the suburbs with a big yard, okay? So what does this word mean? We perhaps did go over it a while back, but suburbs, suburb or suburbs, we're talking about a residential area. It's usually not very large. It's usually a small residential area that is just outside a city or even a town, okay, on the outskirts of a city. So we're talking about suburbs, a residential area just outside a large city. So when he was growing up, he lived in a house in the suburbs, and they had a big yard. So they had a lot of space. We had a yard, and we had lots of space. Space between us and our neighbors. Us and our neighbors. So what is he saying? He lived in a residential area with a big yard and lots of space. Space between us and our neighbors, meaning there was a lot of room, a lot of space between each house. Okay, so his house and his neighbor's house, they were far apart from each other. Okay, now he says, so we were able to turn up the music, have arguments, and the dogs could bark. Let's take a look at the sentence. Now, turn up the music. Turn up, turn up. A person can turn up. Something can turn up. It means to appear, arrive. But in this case, we're talking about music. So turn up the music means to turn up the volume of music, to increase, especially to increase the flow of something such as music, volume, or even the brightness of lights. You can say, can you turn up the lights? You're asking, can you make it brighter? Anyhow, we could turn up the music. We could play music loud. We could have arguments. We could fight. And the dogs could bark. And the dogs could freely bark and nobody would be angry. Now, and of course, Joanne says, party! That's right. You can also party if there's lots of space between you and your neighbors. Now he says, and no one could really complain. But now, living in Seoul, it's a little different. Okay? Living in close quarters with many people, right? Now, close quarters, often even followed by at. It means very close, okay? Very near, in close proximity, okay? Very close. So that was when I was younger, but now in Seoul it's very different. Yeah, a lot of people live in close quarters, live close to each other. That's right, Joanne says, you hear a lot of news. We're talking about news on TV, perhaps. Okay, about noise pollution. We talked about noise pollution, which is a type of pollution, and neighbors fighting over the sound coming from upstairs. Noise could come from upstairs. Sounds could come from downstairs. Okay, so she's talking about how you hear stories. You hear about things on the news about noise pollution and people, neighbors fighting with each other because of all the noise coming from upstairs or downstairs. The police are even involved, okay? People are starting to soundproof apartments by putting mats on the floors, but that's not working very well. That's not working. Okay, let's take a look at the beginning of this sentence here. People are starting to soundproof apartments. Soundproof apartments. Now, we are talking about the act of soundproofing apartments. So it's used as a verb. It means to make your place proof to sound, okay? Insulating a place so that sound does not penetrate. So that sound does not get through, okay? So if you say that your room is soundproof, you're saying that sound does not penetrate through the walls. You could scream, you could play music loud, you can even play an instrument, perhaps the drums in your room, and the sound will not penetrate through the walls. So people are starting to soundproof apartments by doing what? By putting mats on the floors, but that's not working, okay? They're not getting the results they wanted. And so Peter says, oh, really? I'm a little worried. And he says, because I have 2 young children running around, okay? Yeah, kids, they're little, tiny. They're always running around, right? Stomping, running around, jumping around. And then Joanne says, do you even know who your neighbors are? And he says, no, not yet. I haven't met them yet. Well, maybe you should go and befriend them. Befriend, meaning to become friends with. Maybe you should go and say hello to them. Befriend them. Peter says, well, we're moving to a place with many young kids. So I'm a little worried about what? He's worried about the neighbors upstairs. So Joanne is quite confused. Okay, so you have 2 kids. They run around all the time. So if you were worried, you would be worried about people living downstairs. But Peter is saying, I am a little worried about the neighbors upstairs. So she wonders why. She asks, upstairs? He says, well, not as concerned about the neighbors downstairs. Okay, so he's more concerned about the neighbors upstairs compared to those living downstairs. He says, why? Because I care about my sleep. Aha, so that is why. He's worrying about the possibility of the kids upstairs running around disturbing his sleep. So Joanne says, well, to be honest, I'm on pretty good terms with my neighbors that I know. This is one pattern we'll be going over later on. To be on good terms with somebody means to be friendly with somebody. So she's saying, I'm on pretty good terms with my neighbors that I know. She's saying, I'm pretty close with my neighbors. I'm pretty close with the neighbors that I know. We have a good relationship. But, I mean, there was this one neighbor. Okay, now, she's talking about a past experience. One neighbor who used to play the guitar at midnight every single day. So he or she would play the guitar at midnight, at 12 a.m. every day. And that drove me nuts. Now, to drive someone nuts, to drive someone crazy, you've heard of that idiomatic expression, right? It means to really irritate someone, to annoy someone, to frustrate someone. So she's saying, the guitar, the sound of the guitar at 12 midnight, it drove me crazy. It drove me nuts. It really annoyed me. It was an acoustic guitar, but he or she was not very good at it. Okay, maybe he or she was practicing. So, you could hear this twanging at midnight. What is twanging? A twang itself, T-W-A-N-G, is a sound. It's usually a very sharp sound. It's made when plucking a string. For example, a string instrument. You could pluck a guitar string, right? And it's that twang, twang sound. So that's twanging at midnight. So she was annoyed by that. Peter says, did you complain to your neighbors then? Did you confront them? Did you go to them and tell them, hey, this is bothering me? Did you complain to your neighbors? She says, no. I think a lot of people are like me. Meaning, I think a lot of people don't complain. They don't complain, okay? And Peter, well, he gives some advice. He says, well, sometimes I think it's appropriate. It's right. It's appropriate. It could be good to complain. You could call the police. If you don't want to complain yourself, you could always call the police and have them pay your neighbors a visit. And she says, oh no, I think I should just go down and talk to them. So perhaps it is one of the best ways, rather than going downstairs or upstairs, picking a fight with them, starting a fight by yelling and screaming at them. I think it's nice to pay them a visit and trying to converse with them, communicate, have a talk with them, or just to talk to them. And of course, Peter agrees. He says, okay, well, good idea. Okay, so the question is, have you ever had to deal with noisy neighbors before? Have you ever had to complain to your neighbors about anything? Think about that while we take a listen one more time.
When I was growing up, we lived in a house in the suburbs with a big yard. So we had lots of space. Mm-hmm. And, space between us and our neighbors.
Right.
So we could, turn up the music or do whatever, have arguments, the dogs could bark, and nobody really complain. Mm-hmm. But now living in Seoul, it's a little different. You're living in close quarters with many people, right?
That's right. You hear a lot of news about noise pollution and neighbors fighting over the sound coming from upstairs and stuff like that. The police are even involved.
I heard there were some murders about that recently.
Yeah, that wasn't very good. And people, they're starting to soundproof apartments by putting mats on the floors, but that's not working very well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean...
I'm a little worried.
Why?
Well, because I have 2 young children running around.
Do you even know who your neighbors are?
Not yet, no.
Maybe you should go and befriend them.
Well, we're moving to a place with many young kids, so I'm a little worried about the neighbors upstairs.
Upstairs?
Not as concerned for some reason about the neighbors downstairs.
That's interesting.
Because I care about my sleep.
Oh, no. Well, to be honest, I'm on pretty good terms with my neighbors. Well, the ones that I do know.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there was this one neighbor who used to play the guitar at midnight every single day. And that drove me nuts.
Is it acoustic or electric?
Acoustic guitar, but he or she was not very good at it. So you could hear this twanging at midnight. I'm just trying to get to sleep. And
do you complain to your neighbors
no,
then?
that's the thing though. I think a lot of people are like me. They don't complain.
Well, sometimes I think it's appropriate to complain. You can call the police.
Oh no, I think I should just go down and talk to them.
Good idea.
Welcome back. Are you ready for today's actual expressions? Let's begin with three vocab words first of all. The first one we have is suburb. Suburbs. This is what Peter said. He said when he was growing up, he lived in a house in the suburbs, right? As I mentioned, it means countryside or even closer, the outskirts of a city. Outskirts basically means just outside, okay? So just outside a big city, you would call it a residential area in the suburbs, for example. And turn up, now turn up, stress goes right there on the second syllable, or rather on up. It means to appear in some cases. But in today's actual talk conversation, we were talking about turning up the music. So it means to raise, to increase, or even to boost. Okay, to increase the flow of something such as volume or even the brightness of a light. Now here we have close quarters or at close quarters even. Now quarter or with an S, quarters. Now it's pronounced as quar, close quarters, close quarters. Good job. It means very near, in close proximity, or even direct in some cases. Now let's move on to soundproof. Soundproof. We talked about how many apartments are not soundproof these days, so people are starting to soundproof their apartments, perhaps by placing mats on the floor, especially if you have kids and they're running around all the time and you're worried about your neighbors downstairs complaining. Well, you can always soundproof your apartment. So it means to make silent, to make quiet, noiseless, or insulated, okay? Soundproof means not penetrated by sound. And twang, pronunciation is the way the word is spelled, T-W-A-N-G, twang. And it means what? A sound made by a string instrument in many cases. It's a very sharp sound. It can also mean a nasal tone. So a person could have a twang as well, or speak with a twang. It means to have a very nasal sound, a nasal tone. Now let's move on to some patterns. We've got 4 for you. The first one is to be on good terms with somebody. Do you remember what it means? To be friendly with. I'm on good terms with him means we are friendly, okay? I am close with him. I remember being on good terms with all of my neighbors, okay? So to be on good terms with. You don't necessarily say bad terms. To be on good terms is used quite commonly. We're not on good terms is something you could say, but in this sentence, I remember being on good terms with all of my neighbors. It's true. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe before that, I remember being on good terms with all of my neighbors. We used to say hello. We used to exchange food, exchange gifts sometimes. So, be on good terms with means to be friendly with. What about this one? Let's use it in a negative form. Okay, I told you, you don't say we are on bad terms as commonly. You could say we weren't on good terms, or they weren't on good terms, meaning they weren't very friendly with each other. They weren't very close. They didn't really like each other. 2 more times, they weren't on good terms. They weren't on good terms. Our next pattern is drive someone nuts. It means to annoy someone, irritate, or even to frustrate. You can say drive someone bonkers. It's slang, informal. And this one as well, drive someone crazy. Now, I do want to point out that drive someone nuts, bonkers, or crazy, it's an informal expression, okay? It's slang, so mind when you use this expression. My twin brother drives me nuts all the time, okay? Drives me nuts. He makes me crazy. Thus, he annoys me. He frustrates me. He irritates me. My twin brother drives me nuts all the time. He drives me up the wall, in other words. What about this one? This cold is driving me crazy. You can use this too. You can say that somebody drives you nuts, but something can also drive you nuts, meaning it's giving you a very difficult time. It's really annoying. So this cold is driving me crazy. Imagine you caught a cold. It's a very bad cold. You're coughing all the time. You have a runny nose. You're sneezing all the time. It could be very annoying and frustrating. In that case, you can say, this cold is driving me crazy. Okay, let's move on to our next one. Complain to someone. You can complain to your neighbors, or you can call the police and complain to them and have them go visit your neighbors. Even better, I would say you can go to a restaurant. If you're not satisfied with the service you're getting, you could complain to the restaurant manager, right? Here are a few sample sentences. Stop complaining to me about your problems. Yes. If you have a friend or a family member that's always unhappy about something and always complaining and complaining and complaining to you, you can say, stop complaining to me about your problems. What about this one? I'm going to complain to the manager. If you're unhappy with the service, you can say, hello, I'm going to complain to the manager. I'm going to complain to the manager. One more time. I'm going to complain to the manager. Okay? Now, let's take a look at one more. This time we took a look at complain to someone. This time let's take a look at complain about someone or something. Especially if you are dissatisfied about something. You're not happy about something. You can complain about it, right? Everyone is complaining about the weather these days. Everyone is complaining about the weather these days. Now, we have been getting really strange weather. It's been raining a lot. It's been very cold all of a sudden. The summers are very, very hot. Or sometimes we don't get enough rain. Sometimes it rains too much. So you can say everyone is just expressing their frustration by saying everyone is complaining about the weather these days. Okay, one more. People have been complaining about the cafeteria food for weeks. Now in this case, say for example, you go to your workplace and your office cafeteria, they have terrible food. Or whichever, school cafeteria, they serve terrible food. You can say, people have been complaining about the cafeteria food for weeks. I am going to complain about the cafeteria food to the manager, is something you can also say. Okay, that is a wrap for today's actual expressions. Here we go. Practice with them more.